It seems like it's fairly common to see games getting canceled or delayed indefinitely, but it's very rare that we see games that get announced, get a lot of backlash, get kind of thrown into a weird development hell after they lose their publisher, and then re-emerge more than a decade later to even more controversy than there was before. But that's exactly what's happened with 6 Days in Fallujah. And I'm wondering, where is the game? What's going to happen to it when it releases? Let's explore and find out together. 6 Days in Fallujah is an upcoming game that will explore the Battle of Fallujah, specifically 6 days that are said to be the bloodiest in the entire battle between the US forces and Iraqi forces. This battle is one of the bloodiest battles of the entire conflict for the American troops. And it's really the first major engagement between American soldiers and insurgents in Iraq, rather than the Iraqi military. And many people on both sides of the conflict, unfortunately, died. The idea of 6 Days in Fallujah, according to its announcement back in 2005, comes from former Marine Sergeant Eddie Garcia, who was wounded during the battle for Fallujah and proposed the original idea back in 2005. And the game is pitched as an FPS, a first-person shooter, that would really act as a documentary and walk people through exactly what happened and how things went in kind of a day-by-day, hour-by-hour kind of situation. They're planning on doing this by using many different interviews and first-person accounts from people who were there. And the developers have said many times in the past 15 years, which we'll get to, that this game isn't really going to be a commentary on whether or not we should have been in Iraq, but rather a story about the stories of the people who were there on both sides of the conflict, as well as people who were just bystanders and who lived in the area at the time. Now, this game was announced back in the mid-2000s and was met with a lot of negative backlash. You see, the battle happens in 2004, and by 2009, when things were really ramping up, things just felt really raw, to be quite frank. Many of the people who were opposing the game were veterans themselves or were people who were in large support of the armed forces. You also did have some pro-peace organizations as well as just talking heads that were opposed to the game in general because of the recency to the events. And whether or not they should have been opposed or not is certainly a decision for you to make for yourself. But the reality remains that it was only a few years after the events had happened, and they were talking about a pretty in-depth look at Fallujah and the 6 days that this particular conflict took place during. So the game was originally supposed to come out in 2010. It was being developed by Atomic Games and was going to be published by none other than Konami. But after all of this controversy and everything stirred up, Konami said, "We're backing out. We don't want anything to do with it anymore." So Atomic Games took to looking for a new publisher, and after a few months they weren't able to do so. They announced that they were going to have some layoffs, but internal reports suggested that this was really just a skeleton crew and some executives still working at the studio. However, in March of 2010, IGN reported that 6 Days in Fallujah was not only still going to be releasing, but that it was complete. The game had been finished and was ready to be released at some point in the near future. Which is really interesting when you think about the fact that Atomic Games actually went out of business and went bankrupt in 2011, therefore putting 6 Days in Fallujah on kind of an eternal hold. In 2012, David Jaffe, the creator of both God of War and of Twisted Metal, came out and said that he was familiar with the fact that Sony had been looking at helping with development and potentially even publishing this game before or after Konami was involved. Really hard to say based on the information we have, which is pretty limited, but one way or another we know that it's probable that Sony was interested in this game. Confusingly, in 2012, Atomic Games CEO Peter Tamte came out and said that the game was not canceled. They still had all the assets, everything was ready to go, but Atomic Games had actually gone out of business a year prior to that. Fast forward to 2016, when Peter Tamte, the former CEO of Atomic Games, came out and said he had founded a new company called Victora. Victora was going to be publishing 6 Days in Fallujah and working with Highwire Games on getting it developed. Now, Highwire Games is a team made up of people who were formerly from Bungie, which means they worked on some of the original Destiny content, they worked on some of the original Halo games, etc. You've got a star-studded cast working on the game at Highwire. With this re-announcement, they announced that 6 Days in Fallujah was still in development and that they were still going to be working on the original vision of the game, which was creating a true-to-life retelling of the events that happened there. Not necessarily political, not saying whether we should have been in Iraq or not at all, and that there was no politics involved or anything, but that 6 Days in Fallujah was just out to tell the story of what happened there. They also said that they had been working with some different frontline Marines and soldiers who fought there, over 100 different Marines, soldiers, even Iraqi civilians, as I mentioned before, that were present. And the game will actually include some documentary footage, so they've said, that will go in more to these soldiers and individuals' experiences in Fallujah during these specific 6 days. In 2021, you also had large blowback, just like we did back in 2009 when Konami dipped out. The interesting thing is that many pro-military organizations and individuals were very much in support of 6 Days in Fallujah at this point, which is kind of the opposite the way it was over a decade before. You have many more people now who are coming out, and in 2021 especially, saying that 6 Days in Fallujah should be canceled. The game shouldn't be made. The game should be blocked from the publishers and from the different console stores in order to not put the word out. The fear is warmongering and violent intentions towards Iraqis and other such things as that are the complete opposite of what happens nearly 15 years prior. In November of 2021, months after the game had been re-announced, Tanti, the CEO, came out and said that, quote, it had become clear that recreating these true stories at a high quality was going to require more people, more capital, and more time than we had. Doubling our team is just one of the many things we're doing to make sure that 6 Days in Fallujah brings new kinds of tactical and emotional depth to military shooters. So they doubled their team size, they pushed the game back a full year to the fall of 2022, and proceeded with development. During that time, Victoria also issued a statement talking about the different intentions of the game and reaffirming some of the commitments they had made previously about just making it an experiential game, talking about the events. They also stated, though, that the game would be inherently political because war, at its core, is political. They said it would be inseparable from politics, and of course, everyone on all sides of the political spectrum had something to say about that. So what do we know so far? We know that the game was pretty much just conceived of very shortly after the actual events that happened in Fallujah. We know that by 2009 they had secured a publisher in Konami, but then Konami had backed out. We know that the game was said to be complete in 2010, but that in 2011, Atomic Games had actually gone under. In 2016, Victoria was formed, and in 2021, 6 Days in Fallujah was re-announced that it was coming out, that it was going to be coming out that year, later pushed back to 2022. Well, now as I'm making this video, it's early 2023, and we still haven't heard anything about the game. All we've seen really so far are some tweets that are in response to people asking about the game, stating that the game is probably going to slip out of late 2022, and of course some of these tweets were in October and November of 2022, into 2023 sometime. Some of these tweets also talk about still working on core gameplay mechanics that seem like they should have been done earlier in development, but of course they could just be talking about bug fixes and refining and things like that, as sometimes things in game development take right up until the last minute. So where is 6 Days in Fallujah? We have absolutely no idea. 6 Days in Fallujah has been lingering in our minds for many, many years. And of course, it's not been an active development for all this time, but it's clear that the idea of the game and the passion behind the game hasn't gone away. It's also clear that the passion against the game hasn't gone away, although it's switched from one side to the other. I'm really interested to see, one, if 6 Days in Fallujah is a good game, because if it's not a good game, then none of this really matters. And two, what the situation will look like when the game is actually announced and has a release date. We saw recently with games like Hogwarts Legacy and Atomic Heart that the backlash and the people shouting against the games don't really seem to affect the sales. It's all about how good the game actually is. And of course, there may be some people who do or don't buy the game because of different protests and boycotts that are going on. But overall, if you make a good game, people are still going to buy it by and large. We have a lot of war simulators, a lot of games that are purely focused on just putting two sides of players in a multiplayer map and just blasting the crap out of each other. But with 6 Days in Fallujah, it looks like we might actually have a game that is interested in telling a story. And of course, there's some entertainment value there. People are going to get that. But Peter Tamte has said many times in the past that they're not really just trying to make a game that is fun or for entertainment value, but a game that is interested in telling a story. And whether or not people like that story and like the game that's behind that story is an entirely different question. But what remains to be seen is whether or not 6 Days in Fallujah will be given a fair shot. And actually, what really remains to be seen is whether or not it will release at all. Here we are nearly 14 years after Konami dropped the project, and after many discussions of the game still being in development, and after a release date was announced and then another release date was announced and now nothing, it's kind of hard to tell if we'll ever see the game or not. What about you? Are you interested in 6 Days in Fallujah? Are you interested in playing a game that tells this story? Or do you think this game should be put up, not talked about anymore, and thrown away? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for checking out the video. We'll see you next time.